Thank you all for coming. My name is Renee Forsyth. I am the Director of Professional Development for Lyme Connect. And just to provide a visual description, I am a white female with brown shoulder length hair. I'm wearing a maroon shirt and I have a Lyme Connect green background. And we're so excited to have you all join us today as we continue our series of discussions that we will be having focused on the different identities that intersect with disability among our network members. And of course, November is the month when we recognize all who have served our countries. And today we're pleased to have 4 individuals joining us to share their experiences as veterans who live with disabilities. Before we start, I just want to mention that this session is being recorded. It will be available on our website for you to re-listen to or share with your friends and colleagues in just a few days. We do have live captioning available, and if you don't see it, you may just need to turn it on the bottom toolbar. And we're hoping to have some time at the end for audience questions, so please feel free to put those in the chat or in the Q&A windows. And before we officially begin, we're going to start the session with an acknowledgement of the land on which our Toronto office is located. For those of you who may not be familiar, land acknowledgement is an Indigenous tradition and one that many people in Canada and the US have adopted in the spirit of reconciliation with the Indigenous people. I would like to acknowledge that our session today is coming in part from Toronto, which is the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. And since we opened up this session beyond just our network members and our partners to the public more broadly, because we know this is a really important discussion, some of you who are joining might not be familiar with Lyme Connect. So I'm just going to take a moment to tell you a little bit about us. Lyme Connect is a not-for-profit organization, and our mission is to rebrand disability through achievement. And we do that by attracting, preparing, and connecting high potential university students and professionals, including veterans who have all types of disabilities, into our network. And once these individuals join our network, they're eligible to apply for scholarships, leadership programs, internships, and full-time careers with the world's leading corporations, which are our partners. And I encourage you to go to our website and check that out. In turn, we also support our partners in recruiting, onboarding, developing, and promoting all employees who have disabilities. So if you are joining us and you are an individual with a disability, I encourage you to join the network. It's very simple. You just need to fill out a profile. If you are joining us and you're not a person with a disability, but you're interested in the work that we do, please go to our website and join as a friend of the Lyme Network, because you'll be kept up to date about important events and programs that we're having, such as this one today. So I'm so excited to have these panelists joining us today. And our moderator for this discussion is Maureen Elias. Maureen is a US Army veteran and military spouse. She served as a counterintelligence agent from 2001 to 2006, when injuries cut her career short. She has a bachelor's in science from Campbell University and a master's in mental health counseling from Bowie State University. Maureen has worked with 2 of the Big 6 VSOs, including Vietnam Veterans of America and Paralyzed Veterans of America. She was recently selected as a 2021 Department of Veteran Affairs Woman Veteran Trailblazer, and was also recently recognized, which I got to see, and it was very cool, as one of the 2021 Mighty 25 for We Are the Mighty. She also teaches storytelling through her Armed Services Arts Partnership and encourages veterans to find and use their voice. And we are thrilled to have her here with us today. Maureen, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Renee. And thank you to Lyme Connect for holding such an important forum. I'm really excited to have an opportunity to be a part of it. So I would like to invite Richard and Shanitra and Jeff to come on camera, and I will get started with our first question. So, and let's go in that same order, Jeff, Richard, and Shanitra. If you could tell me a little bit more about your time in the military service and how that has led to the work that you're doing now, I think that would be a great way to start this webinar.
So I served 20 years in the US Army. I got injured, shattered my right leg in the end about 19 years into service, which made me intersect into understanding disabilities more. And I am currently the benefits manager at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, where I'm also a PhD student working on policy in educational leadership.
Wonderful. Thank you. Richard?
Hi, so I served for 7 years as an Army combat medic, deployed to Afghanistan. 4 of those years were active duty, 3 in the New York State National Guard. How that intersects with the work that I do now, I co-founded an organization called the Black Veterans Project. We seek to tackle longstanding racial inequities both in the military and across the veterans landscape. And I very much see myself as part and parcel to a generational struggle just for racial equity and equal opportunity.
Wonderful, thank you. Shanitra?
Hi, everyone. My name is Shanitra Bell. I served in the Army for 7 years. Just trying to think where to go with that. So served in the Army for 7 years. And my background was information technology, which actually led me to PwC. I was medically retired in the midst of that. And then I started with PwC and continued my journey in information technology, well, now cybersecurity. Well, I serve various clients within vulnerability management.
Wonderful. And then really quick, so the audience can get to know us, for those of you that are living with visual impairment or blindness, I'm a middle-aged white woman with red hair and a ponytail, hazel eyes, a little more overweight than I would like to be, and I'm wearing a pink blouse and a black cardigan. Jeff, if you could give a physical description of yourself.
I am a white male, blonde to brown hair, beard, wearing a blue shirt. That works well.
Richard?
Hi, I am a light-skinned black male with short brownish black hair, brown eyes, and I am wearing a multicolored sweater.
I'm a light-skinned black female wearing a similar shirt to Jeff, blue shirt, and also wearing glasses.
Thank you so much. So, one of the things that was really interesting to me as I started my career at PVA was I got more involved in the education and employment aspect of policy. And I overheard a conversation in which they were talking about making an informational video for veterans to talk about accommodations. And in the military, the word accommodations actually means your lodgings. And so I was like, why are they having all these conversations about where student veterans are going to live? And they weren't talking about lodging, they were talking about disability accommodations. And then I realized, having raised 3 children on the autism spectrum, that was the way they were using the term accommodations. And it helped me recognize that veterans are most often individuals with acquired disabilities, or they acquire further disabilities through their military service. So I'd like to ask each of you, and let's go in reverse order, Shanitra first. When and how did you learn about accommodations? And if you're comfortable, can you share about some of the accommodations that you've used either at work or at school?
Yes. So I learned about accommodations actually while I was in college. I have a bachelor's degree in biology from University of Georgia. I have a bachelor's in information science and technology and 2 master's degrees, all from Penn State. So throughout that time, that's when I actually became aware of accommodations, because I learned that I was struggling with some of the disabilities that I have, particularly PTSD, anxiety, ADD, and it was becoming overwhelming. So I took advantage of some of those accommodations there. And also at work, most recently I had to take time off due to migraines that I received as well. And that was some of the accommodations that I had.
Thank you. Richard.
Yeah, so I probably struggled with my disability most of my life without any accommodation and didn't necessarily, I mean, even the getting and advocating for myself to get accommodations is somewhat new. I was in graduate school getting my second graduate degree last year, studying documentary filmmaking. And I think we all struggled during COVID, but for me, with my both anxiety, my bipolar disorder, and my ADHD, it was incredibly difficult. And I got to the point where, especially because I was having fluctuations with my bipolar disorder, where I'd missed, I guess, too much of an instruction time, but I had been communicating, and I had just got my diagnosis, my bipolar diagnosis in the middle of the year. And I got to a point where they said, well, you missed too much instruction time, and we're going to have to kick you out of the program. And for me, I was like, and also just the instruction time that I missed wasn't that consequential, to be frank. But long story short, I didn't know. And I had been telling all the professors, because I didn't know. I didn't know it is a disability I struggle with. I've never thought that I should be accommodated, though it makes sense now. I think a lot of people struggle with things and don't know that there are accommodations. And so I essentially had been telling all my professors for months and months that I'd been struggling, that I had just got this recent diagnosis. I was just starting to get medicated. I was, trying to acclimate to it and still keeping up with all the demands of the program, and doing quite well. It was just the class time was very difficult to kind of keep up with. And long story short, when they sent me the dismissal letter, I've become very famous for writing very pointed notes back to people when when I feel disrespected. And I sent them a very pointed note, and I called a friend because I was kind of freaking out. I was like, I'm gonna have to owe them all this money for this program, and I've struggled to complete it. And, it was just very overwhelming for me. And long story short, I basically said, well, I've been telling the professors for months that I just got a diagnosis and no one pointed me to a disability office. So isn't that like just me asking a question, but also saying, this sounds like something you guys should have done? And that changed their entire tone, once I mentioned it. But to me, it was odd because it was just like, you should want to, if you know a student is struggling, you should assume that they're not doing it based off laziness or a callousness for the program, especially when they're excelling in the program. And so to me, it was just it solidified, I think, in my mind, a lot of the other experiences that I've had throughout my childhood and so on, where people weren't accommodating, but didn't know that I had a learning difference, didn't know that I had a cognitive difference, than others. And perhaps I didn't even want to admit for the longest that I did, and then so ridding myself of that shame and standing up for myself. And I finished the program and I did really well. And my first film actually premiered on Friday at a film festival. So all is well. Thank you. But it's still very much a challenge for me to stick up for myself. And just another point, just because I think it is something that I'm still actively processing, even when I'm on this panel with you all. I recently took a job. Friday was also my last day at said job. I was there for 3 months. It was a very disorienting experience. It was a very high, prominent job at this big civil rights organization, leading political comms there. And one of the things that I realized probably a couple of weeks before I put in my 2 weeks was that under the banner of their diversity and inclusion practice, and this being one of the more progressive organizations in the country, they actually didn't understand that people learn differently, right? So when you're acclimating into a new role, and all you're being given is a bunch of Google Docs and being told to learn things over Zoom over the course of months, and things aren't sticking. And I'm like, I know I'm smart enough to do this job. I've proven that I can, but this isn't sticking for some reason. And they aren't doing enough to be proactive about trying to fill the gaps in my learning. And so for me, I was just like, it's not the right fit, so I'm leaving. But long story short, I think that's just another example of me actively learning to one, be kind to myself around my disability, but two, to stand up for myself and speak out about the fact that so many people claim, to care about these types of differences or want to, be supportive, but maybe one, don't know how, but then also a lot of people in my shoes wouldn't know how, right? So they'll feel like failures, they'll cower, they'll fall into more episodes of depression because the world is actually not that accommodating, even though they claim that they're making strides to be. So thanks for the patience with that answer.
Yeah, no, that was a very thorough, great answer. And I think you're right. We have a long way to go. And I do want to point out at this juncture, one of the reasons this panel is on veterans is I think there's something kind of unique within the veteran. And Jeff, I'll get to you. I haven't forgotten about you. That's unique to us, I think, is kind of that hesitancy to identify as someone with a disability. You know, in the military, if you fall out of the run formation, if you can't complete something because you've been injured, that becomes this huge stigma. And oftentimes there's often a fear of something ending your career. So veterans are not only less likely to disclose their disability, they may not even recognize that they have one because we've learned to just like carry on, or that bootstrap mentality, and just move forward and get the mission done no matter what we're dealing with. And so I think there's still so much more work to be done when it comes to educating veterans about what our disabilities are, what accommodations are available, and helping us understand that accommodations aren't a level up, they're a level-er, and they help us be more successful, because I think sometimes we feel like it's a special privilege, right? That person that falls out and rides in the van, they end up with a lot of social stigma in the military. So that's, you know, something that we as veterans come with. That's some baggage that we bring with us to the table, and we really need people who are dealing with disability and diversity and inclusion issues to understand that we come from a very different lens. We didn't live with these disabilities our whole life. There's a lot of stigma and shame in recognizing that we have them. And there's also discomfort in asking for those accommodations that have been created to create the equalizer. On that note, I'm going to pivot to you, Jeff. And first, if you could talk about your personal journey to learning what accommodations are. And then I know in our pre-brief meeting, you talked a little bit about the work you're doing to help educate and inform other student veterans. If you could pivot to that after talking about your personal experience.
No, I think that caveats well, because for me, I did 19 years in the military in the highest aspects, because I was also part of world-class athletes. I got to compete for judo all over the world. And then shattering my leg, it forced me to understand things from a different perspective. And I had so much energy that I focused on certain things that I needed to adjust it. After a dozen surgeries and understanding, I took 3 years when I retired, and I went to the DAV and focused time and helped them. And then this job here at the university helped. And being with veterans, I have a staff of 14 veterans that I interact with every day, knowing the different struggles, like the panelists, some for their whole life, some like myself that just got thrust into it because of an injury, made me realize that, hey, there are so many different perspectives. We need to meet people. And then using my own personal struggles, I always interact with the students to say, hey, this is for you. It is purposely made and done to try to, as you mentioned, even the playing field. So we have a Disability Services is the name of the office here that does accommodations, and they work with students, whether they're veterans or not, and does an individual plan. And that individual plan is so tailored to assist them in every aspect, whether it's school, whether in my case, it might be physical and moving around. They want to look at everything and try to help anyone be better or be their best self. And I think that's the key. And that's where policy has really lagged behind what we appreciate, you know, the golden rule to be to people, having that policy that really reflects and encourages students versus kind of, as you said, we've been in this kind of field that almost pulls you away from saying something's wrong.
Yeah. Great point. And I do want to also point out, you know, there's a couple of assumptions post-military that civilians tend to make. And one of those assumptions is if a veteran discloses a disability, that disability was incurred in service. But actually, a lot of veterans inquire either additional or their original disability long after they've left the military service. And because of that, not all of them are able to access and utilize VA services. So this assumption that like the VA is going to take care of all the veterans is totally a misnomer. Now, for those who are using the VA, research has shown that it is one of the best places for veterans to get their health care, particularly mental health care. We know that it's a good system, but there's an assumption that all vets use the VA for their health care and that the VA takes care of all veterans, and that's incorrect. And so I want to put that debunker out. In fact, only about 1/3 of veterans use VA for all of their health care. That means the rest of us are in the community for that care. And there's also veterans who just don't want to use the VA. They have a distrust of the system. It's not convenient or whatever. So just to put that out there, as we discuss disability, is that, you know, for those of you that are clinicians out there, you're seeing veteran patients. They just may not be identifying that they're a veteran. I do want to pivot back a little bit. One of the things I had asked, and I hope you are comfortable sharing, and I'll start myself, is what are some of the accommodations that you utilize or that you have used through the disability accommodation program? And if you're not comfortable, please don't. For me, I have a hand injury that makes it very difficult for me to write, like by hand. And when I was at Campbell University, I did not know about accommodations. And I would take these written 5-page exams and I couldn't complete them because my hand had turned into this like wonky claw and it wouldn't work for a couple of days because it was just so worn out. And so one of the accommodations that I got was the ability to take a test on a computer. Another accommodation that I got was extended time to take my test because I had a hard time concentrating. Another disability accommodation that I had was having a note taker because writing all those notes in class also caused the same issue. And I know for other veterans, some of them are able to use recordable devices and whatnot. If you're comfortable sharing, what are some of the accommodations that you have found to be helpful in your experience?
I'll go ahead and go first. So for me, similar to you, Maureen, I also had a note taker. I also had accommodations with being able to have extended time, taking exams. For me, I also had an emotional support dog as well to help with anxiety and things like that. So, you know, being on different client sites in my current position, the different clients allowed me to have my dog with me as well. So I would travel with him all the time. He's my best friend. So yeah, just being able to have those various accommodations definitely helped. But those are a few that I had.
Richard or Jeff, would you like to add, or I can move on to the next question?
Sure, I'll add a little bit. So for me, most of the accommodations were physical. They have specific chairs that assist in those aspects. Yes, I have the typical handicap placard and it allows some other aspects in those, but it also limits not only in school, but in the job. They make special accommodations. If they know they're going to do something, they think about it and ensure that that doesn't burden me with extra walking or other aspects, even though most times I still want to try to do those, but I really appreciate it because then when it is a bad day, I don't even have to ask. They're already there to assist.
Wonderful. So ensuring student veterans are informed of accommodations and how to access them is key to greater success. Recently, PVA, SVA, and Wounded Warrior Project, along with Psych Armor, partnered to make 2 short films to encourage student veterans with disability to go back to school, as well as informing them about what accommodations are and how to access them. If anyone's interested, you can view those for free at psycharmor.org. So one of the other topics in our pre-briefing discussion that came up that I would really like to talk is what are some of the assumptions that society has around individuals with mental disabilities that you would like to debunk? And Richard, you touched on those just a little bit, that you're lazy or you don't want to do the work. Would any of you like to speak to that?
Yeah. I think this panel is interesting to me because I'm still processing so much about my disability. So it's like even in the thick of this discussion. As far as what society might believe, I think that there might be there's a lack of general stability. And I think that is not necessarily true at all. That and laziness oftentimes is like, oh, you're easily overwhelmed, and to be honest, I feel like I'm actually really resilient, you know, I'm so resilient that most of the time I don't know when to take a break. I don't know how to like really take good care of myself, and I'm learning how to actively do that so that I can be consistently just on the even keel. But yeah, I think that, you know, I look at my bipolar disorder as a gift. That's how I've always qualified it, even on a spiritual level, because I understand that Western medicine has its own way of codifying things, right? But in other societies, these issues exist, and they're framed differently. And so for me, it's the highs come with the lows, and learning how to move through the lows, obviously, in a healthier manner is really important. But yeah, I think that that's what immediately comes to mind when I think of what society might think of somebody who's bipolar. I think Kanye West is generally what, who comes to the public imagination now when people talk about bipolar disorder. And some people think he's a genius and some people think he's absolutely bonkers crazy. And maybe it's somewhere in the middle is the truth, maybe. But yeah, so.
Yeah, one of the things that I struggled with when I went back to school was, identifying as a veteran alone, because there are stigmas that can come along with that. And I wish I had $1 for every time a fellow student would ask me, like, did you ever kill anyone? There's been a rise in what's known as green training, or making sure that campuses are better informed and better trained for how to service veterans when they come on campus. But you bring up such a great point, and that's the importance of making time for self-care. A lot of times, because we're bootstrapping, we forget to put that in our lives. And so I'd like to pivot a little bit. Shanitra, you've talked about the wonderful experience you've had at PwC. Can you talk a little bit more about how they have made that a very welcoming and inclusive environment, and that you've been comfortable? I know you mentioned you struggled at first whether or not to disclose your disability, and then how you felt after you disclosed it. Can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, sure thing. So transitioning, directly from the military, and trying to determine where I would be a better fit and what organization align with my values. PwC was a better fit because they did align with my values, but I also struggled with whether I should disclose, the different disabilities that I face. I was unsure whether it would initially stop me from getting the job, or if I did disclose, would they think that I wouldn't be able to do the job? Would they not put me on challenging projects? So a lot of things went through my mind, and ultimately I chose not to disclose initially. And I don't think it would have affected me getting the job, but when I came on board, I learned that there are many different accommodations that they offer for people, struggling with or that have disabilities. And for me, that was very important to learn. And then I met others that also struggle with disclosing their disabilities, but just being a part of PwC and understanding all the different diversity and inclusion initiatives that we offer, it's been great. And I support the various initiatives as well. And I think that it's allowed me to be able to speak to other veterans or others that are coming on board, and just let them know that it's okay to be who you are. It's okay to disclose, that you have disabilities, or if you choose not to, that's fine. For me, it hasn't affected my work, or it's been very limited. I know I haven't disclosed on every project that I've worked with, because, I may work with different people for different projects, but if I notice that I need to, for instance, previously I mentioned having to take time off over the summer. I was on a high stress project. It was aggravating my disabilities greatly. And one of my doctors was like, hey, you need to take time off. This is not an ask. I'm telling you. And, I had to disclose that to my project team, and they were fully supportive. They said, take all the time you need. And I went through the various accommodation process within our firm, and it was no problem for me to take the time off. I didn't have to use any of my time. It was basically something that the firm offered. They said, if you need more time, let us know. We'll make it happen. So I took a month off, still paid time off, didn't have to worry about anything. I was still worried about work, of course, but that's some of the various things that, I'm fortunate to be able to have as far as accommodations. But again, it was just difficult to disclose, and I kind of pick and choose. Not that because I feel that anyone will see me any differently. It's just if I see it as necessary to be able or to have to disclose.
Sure. Thank you for sharing. And I think, one of the things that the veteran community has that's rather unique to us when it comes to the concept of disclosing or not is all of the various services. One of the values that is just drummed into our heads is that of integrity. And so when it comes to getting a job, and when it comes to whether or not to disclose, that kind of creates a bit of cognitive dissonance with us, because we've learned to be honest and forthright in all of our dealings. And so there is, I think, a lot of work to be done to make a workplace more inclusive and easier to disclose that type of status. But like Shanitra said, I think there's also a little bit of work to be done on the stigma around invisible illnesses, right? Like if I took time off to get treatment for cancer, I'm almost celebrated amongst my coworkers. I'll get meals delivered. There'll be flowers. There'll be calls to see how my family's doing. But if I take time off for my mental health, especially if I've disclosed that I'm dealing with a mental health illness or issue, there's a kind of silencing, stepping away from, because people are uncomfortable with how to have that conversation. They don't know what to say. They don't know how to engage. They're kind of afraid of it. And so I think that, this conversation is really very important, because many of us veterans are living with both visible and invisible disabilities. That being said, Jeff, what do you do in your work? And what would you say to other college campuses and universities to help better connect veterans with disability accommodations and resources?
So the most important thing is having a champion. And I always use that as, like I said, I have work studies here and they're veterans. And the more I am open with them, the more open they are with others. And sharing that little bit of personality, a little bit of, I feel uncomfortable, allows them to understand you're there for them, and then sharing resources. We have a great veteran center. Everything is set up for accommodations, wheelchair access, everything in those aspects. And when you focus on those little details, well, hey, this is already functionally done. Let's see what else we can improve on. And that's probably the biggest part. The more I share, the more likely somebody else shares, and then more people get help. The only reason I mention that is, and you'd mentioned not everybody gets treatment at the VA. I got most of my treatment at the Center for the Intrepid. President Bush's foundation, it did those things, but it did everything from psychology to the physical aspect. And they made sure your whole body, and some of those strategies that I got forced into, and I might not even have wanted to do, helped me to use that and express it to new ones, because I'm a little older. I have kids in their 20s. So living a little bit more life and understanding and sharing with them helps for a younger generation to be more open up front. And I think that's the most important thing with our campus, is that they feel safe. And so they start to share more. And we have a list of accommodations that we often have. Hey, here's some common ones that the last 10 veterans have used. And them knowing they can get a software that dictates when they speak, because they have problems typing, or any other thing that will assist them from taking tests, really does show them we care. And then they're more willing to, one, help somebody else, and two, succeed in aspects.
Wonderful, thank you. Richard and Shanitra, both of you shared experiences about attending school both with and without accommodations. And Shanitra, I want to point out, in case we haven't, that you have received 4 degrees, and Richard, you've received multiple degrees as well. Can you please speak a little bit and kind of compare and contrast your experience in education before you knew about accommodations and the difference that those accommodations made for you?
I guess I can go
Yeah.
first. Are you want?
Yeah, you can go ahead, Richard. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think I'm a testament to having moved through most of my education without accommodations, except for my last degree last year. And it was really toward the end of the program when I was finishing my film project and just being able to have some extra time with the editing. But other than that, it's been mostly a struggle. And I mean, I graduated high school with like a 4.2 GPA. But my guidance counselor, who was also slightly racist, told my mother that I wasn't college material. You know what I mean? That I wouldn't succeed. And when I was graduating from Fordham, I finished my bachelor's degree in under 2 years. And I went straight, and I was taking like 22 credits a semester, and kind of going a little bit ham there. But I did all that, and I remember one professor said that, well, because I had just got into Columbia, it was said that like, you're not going to succeed at Columbia because XYZ, because if I'm disinterested in like a specific topic, it's also very much more of a struggle. My ADHD is like very much exacerbated, which I think is true to everybody to some degree. And then, you know, even my depressive episodes just growing up in high school and how that affected attendance. And I looking back at it now, and I have a lot of sympathy for me who I didn't have resources. I grew up in a Caribbean American household. Mental health wasn't something that we actually like actively spoke of. You just dealt with whatever your issues were and you soldiered on. But I remember because I'd been going through the same middle and high school for so long, I remember my senior year, I actually got letters for truancy, but the school actually ended up covering for me because I had been such a stellar student and the administration knew what many of my struggles were. So in that respect, perhaps there were accommodations and I still was succeeding in all my classes and all of that. But for me, it was, I look back and I'm like, I should have had a counselor and some medication to like stop me from, you know, I would literally spend days like locked in the closet because I was so overwhelmed by my anxiety and it was the only safe space that I could find. And then I felt ashamed about ever talking about it. I don't even think I mentioned it in public or even spoke about that from my childhood until maybe a year ago. You know, so a lot of these things are just newer things that I'm unpacking and then realizing, oh, that's why that was happening, or this is why, you know, I navigated something a particular way. But I'm so used to not necessarily having the accommodations and then getting the blowback from it, or people's perceptions kind of being informed by my lack of knowing, you know. And so it allows me to, I think, be much more empathetic to others that might be going through things. And a lot of times, especially, I can only speak you know, for the identity that I am, which is, you know, a young Black person. Like, most of society is built around telling you how you're not capable, how you're not going to succeed, and so it becomes difficult sometimes to even ask that you might need a different kind of accommodation because you're just trying to get the same kind of resources and support in general, you know? So, you know, it's another nuance, but I'll end there.
So to speak on my experience, growing up, I didn't think I needed any accommodations. Similar to Richard, you know, in a Black household, we didn't talk about mental health. So it's just kind of like you push through it. But I think that for me, being an athlete in high school, school was fairly easy because regardless they were going to pass me or not, because I was a stellar athlete. I was very smart, but if I knew I didn't have to put forth the effort, I didn't. So when I got to college, that's when I realized that I definitely had a problem, you know, and trying to talk to my family, it was, you know, something we didn't talk about. It doesn't matter. You're going to have to figure it out. And then I went through a bunch of testing and found out that I did in fact have ADD. And that's when I began to receive accommodations while I was at the University of Georgia. But that was only after I almost flunked out, basically. And so going through and realizing that, you know, I had an issue was the first step. And then the professors continued to work with me, you know, giving me extra time on tests, giving me the note taker accommodations, things like that. And then that continued on when I went and got subsequent degrees while I was in the Army and even after. And yes, I do have 4 degrees, so 2 bachelor's and 2 master's degrees. So it can be done, and I'm living proof. And also just to add additional context, you know, like I said, growing up, we didn't speak about mental health, but now as I have kids, my youngest daughter, she's 9, and she's actually suffering from some of the same things that I had. So now we're working to try to get her accommodations and having those discussions with her because she has anxiety. Now she's in the process where she's taking state testing, which is timed. And last year she didn't have time tests. So now she's under pressure, and we're realizing that, you know, similar to me, she needs those accommodations. So I think, you know, the difference between, you know, 25 years ago with me and now with her, that we're able to talk about these things and get her the accommodation so that she doesn't have to experience some of the same things that I went through.
Thank you for sharing. And I think you both bring up a really important point, and that is, you know, we're talking about veteran status and disability status, but there are so many intersectionalities here at play, you know, being someone of color or being multiracial or, you know, socioeconomical barriers or other barriers that you also have to navigate on top of being a veteran with a disability. Richard, I would love it if you would feel comfortable sharing a little bit about how the Black Veterans Project is actually working to improve the outcome for Black veterans.
Yeah, well, the main premise, well, not the main premise, the main element of our work that we've been focused on for the last year is looking at disparities in disability allocation for Black vets. And so that's been in partnership with Yale Law School's legal clinic. The project is much broader than that, but I'll just kind of speak to that work. We've been litigating essentially the starting point is to look at the data that the VA does have. We are launching a 5-year National Black Veterans Survey in partnership with Columbia University School of International Public Affairs in the spring. And that is to also glean more data. But one of the data points that we were able to discover that was pretty damning, and we haven't actually made it super public just yet, but it's that Black vets are actually 29% less likely to get disability for PTSD. And so this is notwithstanding all of the other areas where we know that there are quite likely disparities, and certainly not even looking at the historical vantage point of where statistics have lied. And the implications there when it comes to Black vets. But that's some of the work that we're doing. And our goal is to hopefully inform policy, but also to hopefully coalesce a class action against the VA at some point, which we're in the thick of determining what that will look like with Yale. But it's exciting stuff.
Sure. Yeah, it's super interesting. And, one of the other intersections that I didn't mention, that 5 to 7% of the veteran population is LGBTQ. And we know those that were kicked out due to Don't Ask, Don't Tell are also facing barriers when trying to get access to their benefits and services earned through the VA. There is some work being done to improve that process, but I think we really need to start looking at all the various intersections versus just that one specific lens we're focusing on through a person's life. And so I'm excited to see the work that you're doing, and where that survey is going to be amazing. I can't wait to see the process come out. So one final question for you all before I flip it to Renee for audience questions. As individuals who have acquired disabilities, what life lessons would you share with other transitioning service members or veterans with newly acquired disabilities? And that can also be resources that you've utilized that you would like to share about. Let's start with you, Shanitra.
So for me, I would say don't be afraid to reach out and ask for help, or if you feel like you need help. I know particularly, I think that was one of the things that I struggled with. And then when I got to PwC, I realized that there are many others that are just like me, so reaching out to them for advice, resources to navigate within the firm, to be able to support, the disabilities that I have. So for me, it was more so, I would say don't be afraid to ask questions and reach out for help.
Thank you. How about you, Richard?
I would say the same. Like, don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. I'm still learning how to do that. I think I beat myself up a lot still for the differences that I might experience, and not only just my learning, but just in how I show up in work. But yeah, I think just be kind to yourself, and yeah, I think for me also, the biggest barrier, and this is even an active barrier, so being very transparent here, is the reconciling around even the term disability. I think it's still something that sticks with me, and what the implications are there. But we're also, I think, in our society, so conditioned around having a negative perception of disabilities, whether it's an internal toward ourselves or external, and how that, bless you, by the way, and how that informs just how we look at ourselves, and if we're kind to ourselves for the challenges that we might actually face. So yeah, I think for me, and I imagine for others that might also be in similar positions, it's like learning to look at that difference as not a barrier. It's just a difference, and yeah, it can also be a gift. So that I think is something that I'm still processing.
Thank you for sharing. How about you, Jeff?
For me, as a white male that's 6'3", 300 pounds, I am a large person. I realize I am in a position that most of other ones aren't. I have been in this position of advantage for my whole life, and I came into disability later in life So I'm trying to use every bit of my network to be an ally, to be an advocate, and fight for those people that have almost been shamed into those aspects, and try to show them it's okay, and say the words that they won't, especially to the people that, instead of trying to help, always put down people. So that's my biggest calling, especially later in life, and especially having kids and now grandkids. You appreciate things different and realize that it's more about what you can do for others than yourself.
You do not look old enough to have grandkids. And I think my one piece of advice for future employers or school administrators is meet veterans at the starting point. When you're onboarding them, ask about what accommodations they might need, inform them about what you provide, let them know how to access them and that you're there, and normalize having that conversation with every employee that comes in your door, because that's what's going to help open the key and ensure that your employees and your students are as successful as they can be. And that's what we want ultimately, is for people to reach their highest potential. And with that, I will pass it to Renee to see if there are any questions from the audience. Thank you all so much for your candid answers, and I really appreciate and enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you. And so I'm going to suggest that people start putting their questions in the chat, and I will feed them to our panel. But while we're waiting, I get to ask my question, which is, and Richard, you touched on it, that this disability is not a barrier, it's a difference, and it can be a gift. And we know that from our network members, that living with a disability has developed certain strengths and gifts that they bring to any workplace or any team. So I'd love to hear about the gifts that you, or the strengths that you feel you've developed as a result of living with your disability. And Maureen, I'm going to start with you, because I'd also like to know how you weave it into your storytelling.
Sure. So I think having a disability, I have both visible and physical disabilities, and what they have taught me is a lot of stick-to-itness. You know, there were things that I might have tried and given up earlier when I was not dealing with these disabilities that now I want to, and I have so much more accomplishments under my belt than I would have had I not been living with these disabilities. And I think it has also forced me into advocacy. So for those in the audience, I have 3 children on the autism spectrum, and became an advocate not by choice, but because I had to be. And like Richard talked about, I've had to become one for myself. And so it taught me to stand up for myself, and it's helped me gain greater accomplishments than I ever thought that I would have before I had any of these disabilities. And it's also taught me a specific appreciation for life. You know, when you can only walk at a snail's pace, you learn to appreciate what's passing you by rather than just flying by without a thought to what's happening. Raising 3 children on the spectrum taught me to just take life as it is, and to also just join someone in a moment, if that makes sense. So when my child is having a tantrum or a meltdown, it's not because they're misbehaving, it's because they're super overwhelmed. And it took me a while to get over kind of the shame that people put on me as a parent, because my child, God forbid, had a tantrum in a store because they were so overwhelmed by the noise and the smells. And I learned to be okay with being uncomfortable. And I think that really helped as I went into jobs that you have to be uncomfortable a lot of the time, and you have to be out there and doing the education. And so for me, the disability has become so much more of an impetus to change and growth than I ever thought it could have been. And then in storytelling, I love teaching veterans to use their voices. To me, teaching storytelling is one of the best things that I can do to help a veteran reintegrate with their community. And one of the beautiful things that COVID has done, while it has been awful and horrific on our nation, is that it has also opened up accessibility for a lot of people. And so normally our classes were in person and in DC. And in the year and a half since we've had COVID, or the decade that COVID has been happening, because I've lost sense of time, we've taught 3 classes now virtually, and we've been able to reach people all over the continent, all over the globe, including those whose disabilities would have prevented them from leaving their home, whether that be anxiety, PTSD, or a physical disability that required them to be bedridden. And so it's been really cool to help their voices that largely go unheard, especially because they don't have as accessible of opportunities. To get their voices heard on a national platform has been really exciting.
That is fantastic. I love that. And the bright lining coming out of COVID for sure. There's no question yet, so I'd love to just continue with that question, at least on the strengths piece across the board. So Jeff?
So for me, the strength aspect of understanding disability was just that. It was forced on, and seeing that I might have been part of the problem. Just, not appreciating people for everything they were. And yes, that might be a little shameful in my sense, but opening your eyes and trying to, from a position that most aren't in, expressing to other people what you can do to assist in, finding out more, truly researching and understanding how we can assist to make everybody better. I think that is the part that it doesn't necessarily work for me, because I didn't get disabled until about my 40s, but understanding that and realizing that people go through this from a young age to an old age, we can all be more empathetic and understand and trying to just bridge that divide, because often I can see the dismay in somebody that somebody else has just looked over, and trying to bridge that so both parties feel better. One, for helping, and two, for also trying to not only help them, but help the person that was maybe disgruntled or did not see that they're hurting somebody.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Shanitra?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question once more, please?
What are some strengths that you've developed personally out of living with a disability?
Yeah, so for me, some of the strengths, I would say persistence and determination for me, only because I think that living with disabilities has taught me that not to give up, to keep pushing through it. And especially with having a learning disability, having ADD, I've had to continue to push through despite the accommodations, even when I felt like giving up. I apologize for the airplanes in the background, but just having to push through it. And that's the same thing with work. Even when I felt that I've become overwhelmed or challenged, I'm still determined to succeed, determined to be successful with or without accommodations. And I think that that's really something I've basically gathered from having a disability.
So sorry. Yeah, I would say the same, like resiliency being like a necessity in order to just be able to survive. But also I just think how I see my gift in my bipolar disorder is I do think it lends itself to my creativity. It allows me to think. I believe it gives me a different window into the world, the mania sometimes. And I also think about like brilliant artists who were bipolar and were able to do so many incredible things. And so yeah, I look at it favorably now, now that I know what it is, and now that I'm learning how to manage it.
Thank you all for answering those. Just trying to see what other questions you might have.
If I could add to that, Renee, one of the things that I hope employers recognize, and I think Line Connect has talked about this, and so has Paralyzed Veterans of America, is individuals with disabilities bring to the workforce unique perspectives, out-of-the-box thinking, and unique solutions to problems, because they've had to do that their whole darn life. Or those of us that have acquired them, they've had to do it since we've acquired that disability. And so, when you're looking at how does having someone with a disability bring diversity and inclusion besides just the fact that they have a disability, we bring this intense lens of like, get it done no matter what. Like Richard talked about, that resilience, that bootstrap, We want to be successful, and we're going to get there no matter what it takes. They also, individuals with disabilities tend to be much more loyal to their workplace. And we've seen the giant ghosting that has happened as employers are trying to find employees. And there is this wealth of individuals with disabilities that are trying to get hired right now that are now competing against others without disabilities. And so recognizing the wealth and the value that we bring to the table is so essential and important. There's a lot of fear that hiring someone with a disability means they're going to miss a bunch of time for healthcare and appointments. That's not true, and research has shown that, we miss just as much, if not less time than others, because we want to make sure that we're successful at work. And so, there's still a long way to go to kind of overcome some of the stigmas that come with disability as far as employment goes. And I think there's a lot more work that employers can do to better educate and inform themselves about what value we as individuals with disabilities bring to their table. Sorry, I hope that was okay to share.
Absolutely. No, I'm going to ask this question and then we'll wrap up. What is your proudest accomplishment? Maureen, you're unmuted. Do you want to start?
Sure. I'm a mom, so my 3 kids, and the fact that we've come very far with autism is probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. But as far as personal accomplishments go, to me, so I got out of the military with some pretty severe injuries and had to pivot very quickly to being a full-time mom, and then spent a decade following my husband around the country while he finished his military career. So to me, my proudest accomplishment has been my ability to reintegrate into the workforce as someone who took 10 years off for caregiving and as someone with some extensive disabilities. That's not been an easy thing to do, and to re-enter and to thrive, and in just 4 years go from not working at all to working on Capitol Hill. That makes me pretty proud of myself, because that's a tough journey for a lot of people. And so I think, besides the fact that I have 3 beautiful children, it would be the career that I've been able to establish. And I do want to give a shout out to Student Veterans of America. I think it's touched most of us, but it was instrumental in helping me culturally reintegrate into society as a veteran who had left and not really identified as a veteran previously. Student Veterans of America was really pivotal, and they were some of those who educated me about disability accommodations. And so I will always be grateful to them.
Thank you. And we look forward to seeing you in person at NatCon. So student veterans who are joining, we will see you there. Jeff, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, and I'll actually even hit it towards this question that was in the question and answer, because it's asking about trainings and resources. So for me, as you get a little older, your best accomplishments are, hey, you see how your kids react, right? And then them raising kids is great. But understanding that you can help somebody else understand better. We do, as you mentioned, green zone training. We do a vets training here. Giving resources to somebody else and seeing them thrive has always been. I had the privilege of teaching microbiology in the Army 15 years ago. And teaching something to somebody and really them realizing it and grasping it, and you see that click, that is kind of the thing that is my best part, whether it's for my kids, I told you so years later, right? Or when they're raising kids. So it kind of goes towards that training. You give that training, and then when you see it actually used or come to fruition, that's the best part of anything.
Did I say that? Shanitra, do you have you want to comment on your proudest accomplishment?
Yes, I was trying to think through, my proudest accomplishment. I think that probably just being able to set an example, for my daughters, to being able to push through, especially for my 9-year-old that sees, my disabilities firsthand. So I think just being able to show her that, if I can get through it, she can get through it. During the pandemic, of course, she was here at home with me. Well, both of my daughters were. And just them, seeing me in meetings and things like that, and being able to push through despite everything, that I go through. I think that's probably one of my proudest accomplishments.
And Richard.
Yeah, my proudest accomplishment has been the work I'm doing with Black Veterans Project. Absolutely.
Maureen, do you have any final comment that you want to say before I wrap us up?
I want to thank our audience for making time for this. I know we are all dealing with Zoom fatigue, and I appreciate you taking time out of the middle of your day to listen to us and hear from our lived experiences. And hopefully you know, this sparks it or ignites a flame that builds into a fire to help you seek out veterans, especially those with disabilities, and bring them into your schools and into your employment, because we are going to surprise you continually at all that we will give you. And thank you again to our panelists. You guys were fantastic. And thank you, Renee, for setting this up.
I echo all of that. Thank you to each of you. Maureen, wonderful job moderating. And to each of you, thank you for your service. Thank you for joining us today. This session has been recorded. We will be sharing it out in just a couple days. We also want to continue this dialogue. So we're hoping to set up a community group of veterans with disabilities who want to continue talking about their experiences. So you'll also hear about that in our follow-up with you. But until then, thank you to our audience for joining, and thank you to all of you. This was a tremendous panel. I learned so much, and I thank you for your time and for sharing everything.